Yeah, please, next up, welcome Saul from Pagoda to tell you about design research for delightful experiences.
Get all right. Finally connected. How are you all doing? All right. I actually love the small crowd. I think it's going to be a really fun talk. I'm really excited to talk to you all about co-design. I've been a researcher for now, I guess it's about 11 years. It's been a long time. And I'm really excited to talk to you about co-design research and how it can enable basically better experiences for your products. With that, design is really messy, right? Getting stakeholders, whether that's designers, PMs, engineers, everybody has to have a solid vision in order to actually build something that's useful and delightful. And as my colleague Sarah mentioned earlier, things that are actually going to solve problems. And research is one way is one way that we can mitigate some of the risks in this process, in this very nonlinear process. And co-design research specifically, I think, is a really amazing opportunity for us to get to those delightful experiences. But it's not perfect. I'm certainly not going to give you the tools that you need all in 20 minutes to go build delightful experiences. But what I hope I can do today is empower you all to run your own co-design, either research sessions or co-design workshops, so that you get closer to a better answer and a better outcome. So today we're going to talk about, what is co-design. We're going to talk about why co-design is important, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how you can run your own co-design research session, and we'll wrap up after that. So what is co-design? Just a show of hands from the audience. Who all knows what co-design is or has heard of co-design in the past? All right, so we have a couple folks. Great, that's awesome. Even if you've never heard of it, again, I hope to empower you all to be able to go and run your own co-design sessions after this. So let's start with a really boring definition of what co-design is, and let's all read this together. So co-design is a process of collaborative design thinking or a joint inquiry and imagination where different participants associated with the design process work together to identify a problem, develop solutions, and evaluate those solutions. So obviously really wordy, really boring, but let's simplify that for a moment. So rather than thinking we are designing for users, you can think about this as a process of where we might have designers build a prototype, they put it in front of users, they get some feedback, we go iterate on that, and then we come back to the users. Instead of designing for users, we're actually designing with users. So we are putting users at the center. We're putting users at the table with us when we're making decisions. So just before we go on a little bit further, let's talk a little bit about a brief history of where co-design even came from. So it actually started in Scandinavia with trade unions, and they called it cooperative design back then. The Americans heard about it in the 70s, and they said, we don't want to call it cooperative design. We're actually going to call it collaborative design. So, we had to put our own mark on it. In the 80s, co-design started to migrate to other fields. Urban planning started picking it up. Software design started picking it up. Then with that, Don Norman came around. If you've all heard of Don Norman, he's basically the father of HCI or UCD. He came out with user-centered design, and that's kind of where we had a little bit of a fork in the path. Participatory design or co-design had its own path. User-centered design had its own path. We can think about those two different paths, again, as a top-down process where we're designing for users. That would be user-centered design. and then designing with users would be more of the co-design aspect. Then in the 2000s, it started to gain notoriety, co-design, that is. We had a lot of academic researchers do research, and basically they showed that co-design was leading to better outcomes, to richer solutions, and it was a really, really positive force in our toolkit. And then lastly, the 2010s to present, it's gained mainstream, or it's gotten mainstream. So we have both practitioners, or excuse me, research practitioners and non-research practitioners utilizing co-design research in their programs and organizations. So to talk about what co-design is, we have to talk about what co-design is not. Co-design is not a place for us to validate our assumptions. We're not going to talk to our users and say, hey, is this idea that we're coming up with a good idea? Great, all right, we can run with that. Or if they say no, we might say, well, that was the wrong person to talk to. We might want to talk to other people. So we're not validating assumptions. We're also not asking users what they want. We've all heard the famous quote, if from Ford, so to speak, if we had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. I don't think really asking people what they want is the right approach. We're also not asking for free work. If you're familiar with this episode of The Simpsons, Homer's long-lost brother comes to him, and his long-lost brother is a car manufacturer, and he says, Homer, you're the average American man. How do we build the best next vehicle? And Homer says, well, we need a glass dome in the back so that we don't have to hear our kids, and we need a horn in 4 different places. And basically, Homer gave him some free work. It didn't turn out so well. So we're definitely not asking our users for free work in that regard. So let's go back to the definition. I want to highlight a few key points that I think I need to hammer home. So co-design is a process of collaborative design thinking. That means we're all working together. Where different participants, that piece is crucial because we are not only going to have participants in the room, but we're also going to have different stakeholders in the room when we're co-designing. So that's the people that you want to talk to and actually get feedback from, but also the people who are building the solutions. We want sort of an equitable and inclusive space where everyone can feel empowered to share their ideas. And ultimately, we work together. So what we want to build towards is cohesion in that space so that we can, again, build towards better outcomes. So again, we're designing with our users. So why co-design? What makes co-design so important? In the grand scheme of things, we obviously have a lot of different research methods. There's usability testing, there's benchmarking, eye tracking, A/B testing, pick of the litter, so to speak, in terms of research that we can do. What makes co-design so special against all of these methods? Well, first and foremost, it reveals what people value. And when we're building our products, we have to represent what people value so that they can see themselves in their product. They have to be able to understand that what they use is valuable to them. It also shows how users make choices. So if, when you're in your session with your user and you're having a discussion about a prototype that you put together, they're going to talk about trade-offs. And all of design, all of building, all of designing is trade-offs. And so understanding what those trade-offs are from your user's point of view, again, will highlight what they value and what's most important to them. It's also going to uncover users' latent and unmet needs. Oftentimes, when you're in a session with a user, they might think of an anecdote or a story where they wouldn't have otherwise. But because you have an artifact and they have lived experience that they're bringing to the table, you can then use that as a way to trigger those stories from the past to say, you know what, actually, that reminds me of the time that I did X, Y, and Z, and this is why that's important. Or here's what I did, or here's the frustration I experienced in that story. It also challenges users' preconceptions. And what I mean by this is that you'll have an idea that you're presenting to your users. So you might have a prototype, you might have a wireframe, whatever it is. The user is then going to be able to put that story together in their head and say, this works for me, or this doesn't work for me. Or, hey, now that I think about it, this is not what I was thinking. So maybe here's another solution that we can actually work with. It'll also challenge your own preconceived notions. I have worked with lots of designers who come to the table and they say, oh, we've done analytics, we've done data science, this is exactly what they need. And then it goes to some form of research, the feedback comes back and says, wow, that is not at all how people, they didn't use it at all how I anticipated that they were going to use it. So it challenges our own preconceived notions as well. And lastly, it leads to richer solutions. So where you might have something like usability testing, where you put a prototype in front of a user, they try to run a few tasks with that prototype. All they can really say is that, or all they can really show you is that, hey, this didn't work as intended. It was really kind of it's a binary. Did they complete the task or did they not? Not to say or diminish the value of usability testing. It definitely has its place. But when we talk about co-design and we actually utilize people's lived experiences to help bring solutions to the problem, then we're now solving actual problems from the users, which leads to richer solutions. So how do you run a co-design research session? And that's kind of what I hope to do for you all today, is to give you the tools that you need to go and run a session on your own. But before I do that, I want to talk about a real-world example, and it is actually very timely. So my colleague here, Schwan, if you could just raise your hand, she's going to be running co-design sessions here at NEARCON 23. She and I worked together to put a design together, a research design, so that we can run research and get ideas and thoughts and your experiences. So please find her after or during all of NEARCON if you'd like to participate. So another piece of this is, what does co-design actually look like? What does it mean to run a co-design session? So a co-design session really looks a lot like typical research. Like, you might have an interview with someone who sits across from you or next to you. You might have a series of questions that you ask them. But the key part about co-design sessions is that you're presenting them with some sort of artifact, right? You might have a prototype. Again, as I was mentioning, you might have wireframes, you might have even paper and pen. But the idea is that then they can sketch out or build solutions to problems that you're presenting them with. And so, again, it looks very much like a usability session, an interview session, or if you're doing it virtually or remotely, you can do it over Zoom, where you're in a session with your stakeholders and the participant, and you're maybe using a tool like Miro or FigJam, where you can all collaborate together in a tool. So how do we run our own research? I want to talk about the 3 phases of research: the planning, the conducting of the actual session, and then what do you do with the data afterwards, the analysis. So planning the research starts with who to involve. So this starts from both internally, what stakeholders do we need to be involved in this project? Do we need everyone? Do we need PM, design, engineering, content design? Do we need everybody to be involved, or do we just need a few people? And then who do we recruit? Is that going to be, you got to figure out what your demographic that you're going after. Are they people who are familiar with your product? Are they people who are not familiar with your product? There's a lot of dimensions in terms of who to recruit, but those are all key decisions that you and your team can make about who to actually bring into the session. You also want to determine the objectives. So are you looking for a specific solution to a specific set of problems, or are you looking for broad feedback? The idea here is to determine exactly what you want to get out of your user. And funny enough, it doesn't involve asking users what they want or to validate assumptions. You actually have to think about what is exactly you want out of the research session. Then you want to decide on what prototype you're going to use. If you have a set of screens that you want to show, are they static screens? Are they going to be interactive? Is it going to be a wireframe where maybe it's not as high fidelity? or maybe you want to go even as low fidelity as possible and you want to use paper and pen. I've run many, many sessions using paper prototypes, and they have been very, very successful. You get a lot of data that way. So now on to the conducting of the research. So when you start the session, let's say they logged into Zoom, the participant has logged into Zoom, you're there with your stakeholders, whoever is facilitating that session should be really focused on building rapport. Try to make the participant to feel as comfortable as possible. Ultimately, what you want to do is facilitate and build a space of trust so that they can offer you solutions as you're going through the session. Then from there, you want to walk through the activities. You can say, hey, all right, we're going to start off with a set of questions. I want to understand your lived experience. I want to understand, what problems you're facing today in terms of, what you do with this product. And then after that, we're going to go into a co-design session where we're going to build some solutions together. And then we'll talk about those solutions afterwards, where maybe we'll vote on the outcomes of those solutions. And then ultimately, this is kind of like a meta comment. You want to stay curious throughout. So as you're running through the sessions with your users, they might offer up a solution and say, hey, I think it's better if we place this widget over here on the corner, or if this widget allowed me to do X, Y, and Z. Your position as the observer and facilitator is to stay curious. Wonder why. Why is it that you need it over here? Or why is it that you need to have this content included? Again, it's really about surfacing those values that people have around your product so that you can reflect that back to them. All right, let's talk about the last phase, the analysis. So you've run all your sessions. You've done 5 sessions. You've done 4 sessions. You've done 10 sessions. What do? Well, you gather all of your files, whether that's handwritten notes, typed notes, it's your recordings, it's your transcripts, all of that. You put that into one central repository so that you can go ahead and start finding patterns. At a certain point, you will start to get similar types of solutions, you will get similar types of suggestions, but the idea is that you want to find these patterns because then these are the pieces that you use to figure out what to do next. Okay, do we build these solutions? Do we table these solutions? Are the solutions feasible? Are they too high risk for us at this moment? That's all for your organization to determine. But from there on, you determine the next steps. So with that, we've talked about what is co-design. We've talked about why it's important. And we've talked about how to run a co-design session. And I want to leave you with this closing quote here, which says, co-design is not always easy, but in the end, you achieve much more involvement and commitment towards the outcome. And what we are all doing in terms of research is trying to mitigate risk and lead to a better outcome. So I think that co-design is a really, really fantastic way for you to get richer outcomes. And just a shameless plug here, we have a research panel, and you can earn NEARCON by filling out this intake form, and you can find it at several of our booths, but feel free to join our panel if you are interested in participating in research. And with that, I'll say thank you.